Thank you for joining us today. My name is Joanna Manter, and I'm the team lead for arts and events here with the City of Beaumont. Thank you very much for coming to our grant writing workshop. Here with me today, I have Amy Ma, who is the chair of the Grant Funding Advisory Committee, and she's part of the team of individuals that reviews all of the grant applications that come in. And Amy will be able to add some great tidbits of information as we're going along. And yeah. Amy, did you want to just do a quick hi and introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm just a citizen of Beaumont who decided to volunteer on this committee, and it's really interesting being able to see all the applications that are coming on and find ways to fund different activities that will make our city even better.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen. And as we're going through the presentation, if at any time you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, type your question into the chat, and we'll try to answer as we go. All right, we're off to the races. Oh wait, did that go away? Am I screen sharing? Oh, I gotta hit the share button. There we go. All right. So welcome everybody. We are here today to talk about the Community Grant Funding Program. I did this workshop earlier in the year. We have made some updates to the guidelines as well as the application form. So there's a few little new bits of information for the fall. We're going to cover the Community Grant Program granting priorities, the application process, give an overview for that, overview of the timelines and key dates. We'll discuss eligibility. We'll walk through the application form itself, with some how-tos and some tips, as well as the final report and opportunity for question and answer. All right, how it started. It was approved in late 2018 with the first intake taking place in the spring of 2019. And over the past 3 years, over $185,000 has been awarded to community groups right here in Beaumont. The grants support operating expenses, and this is for the groups that are within their developmental stage. So a new organization or an organization that has undergone a significant mandate change. So it's almost like they're kind of new and starting out. It also funds new and one-time projects and initiatives, as well as events. You can definitely make more than one application per intake or per year. We just ask that each project has its own application. Joint applications are also welcome. So if there were 2 community groups or 3 community groups that were wanting to collaborate together to host a particular event or see a significant project undertaken, joint applications are more than welcome. Granting priorities. Basically, the list is here on the screen. The goal of the program is to build efficiency and sustainability through measurable outcomes for the groups that are applying. And in terms of priority criteria, the advisory committee is going to be looking at how your project, event, initiative, how it is targeted to the general population within Beaumont, or if it enhances safety, attracts visitors, if it contributes to the local economy, promotes volunteerism, and essentially adds value to Beaumont and its residents. Now, you don't necessarily need to tick off each one of those boxes. You don't need to meet every single priority at once, but there is sort of a recognition that these are sort of the key points and the highlights that the program is trying to help groups meet. Overview. Basically, what we encourage people to do is, as a first step, is to review the guidelines themselves that are available on the website and confirm whether, first of all, your organization and both the project or initiative are also eligible. So the organization itself, but also the project. You are welcome to contact administration for help with that, determining eligibility. After you've determined that, you go ahead and submit your application. The applications are then screened by city staff, and once they're deemed complete and eligible, they're forwarded on to the Grant Funding Advisory Committee. And this committee is made up of members of the community. Amy is the chair for this year. The committee itself is 3 to 5 members at large, and during the review process that the committee undertakes, there's an option for you to participate in a 10-minute Q&A. We'll cover this just in a little bit in more detail, but that is an option to be aware of. At this point in time, the committee presents its recommendation to City Council, and it's City Council that ultimately makes the final decision. And everyone should be aware that during the process, the evaluation process, the committee as well as City Council can decide to grant all of the funding request. They can decide to grant a partial amount of the request or none at all. And regardless of the outcome, everyone will be notified, and successful applicants receive a check for 80% of their requested funds upfront. And once a final report has been received and approved, a check will be issued for the remaining 20%. Now, the next slide here, I've got some contact information. So if anyone has any questions at all throughout the process, you can email communitygrantapplications@beaumont.ab.ca or call the number on the screen. And that email or phone call will go to either Karen, who is the admin assistant for the recreation department, or it'll come to myself. So between Karen and I, we'll work to help answer questions you have about the program, about eligibility, how to approach writing the grant application itself, and before you even get started on that part of it. Okay, timelines and key dates. So right now we're looking at intake 2 for the year 2022. And the grant right now is targeting, or the grant program itself, I should say, is looking to support projects and initiatives that will be taking place from November 1st of this year all the way until the end of November of next year. So applications are currently open during the month of October. So the deadline is October 1st. During the month of October, the applications are reviewed. Then at the end of October or early November, the committee presents its recommendation to City Council. City Council will make its final decisions, and then City Administration will inform all applicants. And November 2022 to November 2023, the projects are executed, final reports are submitted, and then final payments are issued. The next slide actually covers the 2023 year, and this is really important to note because there's some overlap. So the next screen is going to show you that the dates of your project would actually make you eligible to apply for multiple intakes. So there are 2 intakes per year, the first one being April 1st and the second one being October 1st. So you can see that for 2023, the dates are set for April 1st, 2023 and October 1st, 2023. And the first intake covers projects taking place between May 1st of that year to May 30th of the following year. And then again, the second intake is November to November. So again, there's multiple opportunities to apply depending on the timing of your event. So for example, if your event is taking place during the remainder of this year or the very start of next year, you'll want to apply by October 1st. If your event is taking place May, August, even up to October, November of 2023, you've actually got quite a bit of choice. You could apply as early as October 1st of this year. You also have the option of applying during the first intake of 2023, or if your event is November 2023, you still have that one window where you're actually eligible to apply during 3 different intake windows. So again, just trying to talk about project eligibility and making sure that you as an organization are looking to apply in advance of your event. And I know sometimes, it's hard to see far out. So there is a consideration by the Grant Funding Advisory Committee that, if you're applying for something and you're waiting on confirmation by another governing body, say, there's a lot of sports tournaments, things like that. If you don't know for sure if you've been granted hosting, if that hasn't been awarded yet, you are very much still welcome and encouraged to apply. There's no penalty for receiving a grant and then having to say, we actually weren't awarded this opportunity. So we're not able to use the grant monies as awarded. There's absolutely no penalty for that, and you would not be precluded from applying again in the future or for a different project. So I felt that that was really important to mention. Who can apply? This is covered in detail in the application guidelines, and I won't read the list out here, it's quite extensive, but essentially we're looking for registered nonprofits within the community of Beaumont. A few other ways, First Nations and Métis settlements are welcome to apply, as well as health foundations under the Health Authorities Act, as well as universities, colleges, and institutes. The groups that are not eligible for this particular grant are for-profit organizations. If you are an organization that is not registered under one of the above mentioned acts, or if you have overdue or incomplete accounting or reporting outstanding from previous grant funds received, as well as individuals. Now, there's a little bit of an opportunity here where, say if you're part of an organization that is brand new, the process of becoming a registered nonprofit hasn't been completed yet, or you're an individual, you can go to a registered group and say, hey, would you guys sponsor us? So there is an opportunity for a registered nonprofit to take on a bit of a mentorship opportunity and work with a non-registered group to help move forward an application. Okay, so these are some kind of high-level key points about the grant itself in terms of eligibility. We're looking to see a funding request that falls somewhere between a minimum of $1,000 and a maximum of $10,000. Eligible expenditures only. So there's a list in the guidelines that breaks down quite detailed what would be considered eligible expenses, and we'll touch on that here too. Another important note is that we require that the organization that's requesting funds be able to match the same amount or exceed what they're requesting. So if as a group you apply for a grant and are requesting $5,000, we're going to ask that we can see an equal or greater amount that you as an organization are able to contribute towards the project. So, if a project has a total budget of $12,000, the most you can request during this grant process is $6,000. This was also mentioned before. If your organization has received previous grant monies from the City of Beaumont, previous reporting requirements need to have been met. We're also looking to, during the evaluation of the project application, the committee is going to want to see how the project initiative event clearly benefits residents within Beaumont itself. Ideally, we'd like to see measurable targets and outcomes. We'll go into a little bit more detail about that in a moment. And we're also wanting to see that the project dates fall within the timelines for the grant intake window. One important note is that organizations can receive funding for 3 consecutive years. And then after that time, they need to take a little break from 2 intakes. After that time, they'll be welcome to apply again. All right, how much to ask for? So we talked about this a little bit. So in terms of the matching funds, this can come in a variety of different ways. I mean, I think the most obvious, what comes to mind most obvious at first is money, and that can be contributions that your club already has saved up. You've been working towards hosting an event or purchasing a piece of equipment, something like that. So there's club contributions earmarked. There can be cash donations that you're soliciting, registration or participation fees, ticket sales, sponsorship dollars. So we want to see in your budget, how you can fill those lines in that regard. One other way to do this is through the donation of equipment, services, materials, or time. So volunteer labor. And one of the next slides here will cover how the dollar amount for that time and those volunteer services, volunteer equipment are calculated and accounted for. One other thing to consider is whether or not you have the capacity to apply for other grants. from the Alberta government, from private companies. There's other organizations out there that are offering different grants available to different groups, whether it be to fulfill a certain mandate or fall within a certain region. So there are many other grants out there. It can be a very time-consuming process to complete all of these grant applications. And as part of this too, the budget can include funds that you're requesting, but not even yet secured. So you can list in your project budget that, you know, you're requesting X number of dollars from a grant through the Alberta government, for example, and you can show all of those different lines of revenue coming in. In terms of valuing the gift in kind donations, this comes from the CFEP grant. We've taken this from the Alberta government and looked at how they've valued everything. And this is fairly standard across the board. You'll see this valuing fall in line with many other grant applications that you'll see out there. And in terms of donated labor, if it's an unskilled labor, you know, that could be volunteers helping with admission or setup, tear down, you know, doing some administrative work behind the scenes leading up to a project or an event, that would be valued at $20 an hour. Skilled labor is at $35. And if you're requiring the use of heavy equipment and an operator, that would be at $70 an hour. Now, if there's an organization or a company that is able to donate professional services, so this would be folks that have a designation behind their name, perhaps, you know, having someone with an engineering certification, professional engineering certification, you know, they could be donating their professional services in that regard, and will want to see verified fair market value. So the way that you provide the supporting documentation, you know, keep track of volunteer hours with sign-in sheets, make sure you have people's names, the date that they came in to do the work, the type of work that they were doing, the number of hours, and the rate that you're assigning for that work. And if a company is providing professional services or equipment, you know, say, for example, if you need audiovisual equipment and you get a discount from a company, you can show that the fact, you know, you might be paying 3/4 of the cost and they're giving you a discount of 25%. That's real revenue that you can account for in the donated equipment or services. And what would be best there is letters on official business letterhead indicating the clear fair market value. Within the guidelines, there's quite an extensive list of what are considered eligible expenses. And a good guideline is to recognize that if something is required for that specific event, initiative, or project, it would be eligible. So something that would perhaps have a very long life beyond the specific time frame of a project or an initiative, that might start blurring the lines where you're saying, okay, that's actually going to meet a need well beyond the specific project or initiative. You know, but if you're refurbishing something, I know in the past we've seen successful grant applications that have awarded funds to help purchase equipment that would, you know, give a youth athletic group an opportunity to increase how they time their swimming competitions or equipment for a particular space so that it's better suited for that type of activity. So all of those obviously do have a longer term impact. But just trying to, you know, be really clear, okay, do we need this particular equipment, material, rental of something for this specific project or initiative? If the answer is yes, then it will most likely be eligible. Now, what is not eligible? There's a whole list here, and I think what's really important here to remember is basically we're looking to support projects and initiatives that are currently being planned, that will be coming in the future. We're not looking to support debt retirement, deficit reduction, retroactive grant funding. So this is important to look at the date guidelines and ensure that your project or event or initiative falls in the right time frame. The grants also do not support for-profit commercial ventures or private organizations. And the event or initiative doesn't necessarily have to take place within Beaumont boundaries. That's most obvious. That would be a clear benefit to the folks within Beaumont. However, if there's something outside of city boundaries and you can clearly demonstrate how this still serves a need, meets a need, benefits Beaumontonians, then that would still be eligible. Okay, now getting into sort of like the meat and potatoes of how to prepare grants. Now this is applicable to the grant programs that the City of Beaumont offers, but I would also say this is applicable to any grant program out there. And the first thing is to start early. And as part of that initial review process, review everything, review the full grant package, guidelines, application forms, final reporting requirements, any templates that are provided, because there's often, I don't want to say like hidden information, but you'll see suggestions about how to gather the information that you need to complete a full and robust application, if you can read everything that's available to you. And again, I would very much encourage people to reach out to myself and Karen. We'd love to chat with you, talk through, even just to have an initial conversation of, say, hey, our organization is thinking of this. Would this be something that would fall within, the granting priorities for the community grant program? One thing that would be beneficial for all organizations to do for this grant program, but also other grant programs, is almost to sort of keep a bit of a working file where you can keep track of everything related to you as an organization. So your mandate, your mission and vision, the history of your group. We'll get into the more details about the project budget, but having an understanding of how the specific project budget also fits in within your entire organization's overall budget, what it is you're trying to achieve, that will help paint a full picture as to, you're asking for some funds to help do something. And so what we want to see is a full picture of why requesting this support would be a benefit to this particular event, initiative, project, but also to your organization as a whole. And then again, make sure you keep track of everything, hang on to those documents, your working documents, your final submissions, because there's often opportunity to repurpose what you've written, either for the final report or for other granting opportunities. As part of that whole start early business, if you can plan time to get feedback and work through some revisions, have someone else who's not as intimately involved in the project or the grant application itself take a proofread. Look for spelling and grammar mistakes. When you've read something and you know what you're trying to write, it's really easy to miss a or a the, or seeing something you're missing a word because you're doing some edits. So if you can take some time to plan for that, that would make a stronger application for sure. Before we move on, Amy, I just wanted to give you the opportunity, if you had anything that you wanted to say about, jumping into the whole application process.
The main thing when we're reviewing them is we want the applications to be concise, really detail your plan, show that you've thought it through, make sure the budgeting is clear. So basically everything you've been saying is make sure you go through everything in detail and make sure it's clear, because the easier it is for us to review it, the easier it is for us to grant funding to a certain extent.
Yeah, perfect. We're going to walk through the application form right now. So we'll go through each segment of the application form and we'll touch a little bit more on those points that Amy mentioned. So the first part of the application form is the applicant information. This is relatively straightforward. We're looking for all of those, important contact details. So the organization name, physical year end. We're also looking for a contact person. So this would be the person that would be leading the project, that we could contact for more information. It doesn't necessarily need to be the president of the organization. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. If you have charitable numbers and incorporation numbers, please do include that. Choose which registered group or which legislation your registered group falls under through the checkoff boxes. And then if you have, we'd like to get some details about previous financial support that the organization has received from the City of Beaumont. So it doesn't necessarily need to be from this particular granting program, although that's most likely what it would be from. So check off that box, yes or no. And if you have, please include the details with your project name, the amount of money that you received and the year, and whether or not final reports have been submitted. So now if you have a project that's currently ongoing, so for example, if your organization applied last fall, or sorry, in the spring, and you're currently having a project or it was completed in the summer and that the reporting hasn't been finished, as long as you still get your report in within the appropriate reporting timeline, you're still eligible. So if your program is still ongoing and this request is for something, 6 months down the road and the current project that you're working on is still ongoing, that is very much okay. This is just sort of another opportunity for us to double check and make sure that the reporting requirements are being met. Okay, project details.
I was just going to jump in.
Yeah,
You'll notice on the bottom of your last slide, it meant there's a box for if people would like to appear before the committee. I would just like to emphasize how helpful it is when group members do come before the committee, because then we're able to ask questions and get any clarity on any issues throughout the application that may have been unclear to us at the time.
Thank you, Amy. Yes, that was really important. And we have the opportunity of having you come in person. And also with the joy of Zoom and all these kind of things, we can also slot you in virtually. So I know people's schedules are very busy, and we're, especially the folks that are often involved in writing these applications, are busy doing other volunteer work or shuttling kids or, going to work back and from. So we can do our utmost best to fit you in either in person or virtually. Okay, project details. Tell a compelling story. So part of this is, I think as organizations, as groups of volunteers, we're really familiar with the work that we're doing. We know why we as an organization are pursuing a particular event or initiative. The thing that's really important to remember is that it's best to assume that the members of the grant advisory committee that are reviewing the applications know very little or nothing about either your organization or the project that you're trying to complete. So knowing that, going in with that approach, really looking at, why is this important? Why is supporting this project that we're trying to undertake important to the entire city of Beaumont? And that will help, inspire people to, come on board and be a part of your initiative. As Amy had mentioned, balancing conciseness with enough detail. So that kind of goes along with if people are not familiar with your organization or with this particular project, there's a need to make sure that yes, you're concise, but also give enough to give us the full picture, give enough context to help us understand, how this project fits within your, long-term goals, your overarching mandate as an organization. To go along with that, please write out acronyms for the first time. And if you can avoid lingo, and this is where that review by somebody outside of your organization can be really helpful, because you might not even realize that there's kind of a jargon or a way of speaking that people within your organization use. So having somebody outside of that can be a really good sounding board. Now, this little tip is true of all grant programs. Use the wording that falls within the grant guidelines, the application form itself, because this speaks to how your project, how your initiative, meets the requirements of the funding priorities. So if you're able to say, yes, we do this project will benefit all Beaumontonians, and this is how, then it'll help tell that compelling story that also in a way meets the funding guidelines. If there's a way that you can use numbers to show your impact, because again, everything is all relative. And if you say, oh, we're going to have a big impact, well, how do you quantify that? What does that mean? How many people are going to be involved? Is there a way to measure the kind of improvement that you believe that your project or initiative is going to have? That really helps tell the story and give context to folks that aren't as familiar with what your organization does. My suggestion here is to start your application by writing, rewriting, and then editing. So in the initial stages, just write everything down that comes to mind. It doesn't have to be complete sentences, just, bullet points. And it's almost like if you were to imagine yourself speaking to somebody, and I'm sure you've done it, talking it up, it's like, oh, this is why we're doing it. This is so important. Get that language down on paper, even if it's just in bullet point form. Once you've got that information down, take a look at the application questions, the different segments of the application form, and look at how the information you've got falls into a good sequence that goes through the questions. Also, helps paint a picture in a logical way. Do some rewriting, flesh those sentences out a little bit more, flesh out, like a paragraph. Talk to your kids that are doing all this in their high school English classes with their story arc and all that kind of stuff. And then from a conciseness standpoint, take a look at where you're repeating either information or sort of general sentiments, and look where, there's opportunities to, just be a little bit more concise and succinct. And if there's information that it might be like more like filler. So if ideally everything that you write is going to help flesh out the story, give context, and help explain the need and the impact that your project or initiative is going to have. And then again, take an opportunity to get feedback from outside of your group, and then look at editing or rewriting to incorporate some of that feedback. All right, project information. So again, we're just getting into the heart of the application form itself. At the very top, we've got the basics: project name, how much money is being requested, the start and the end dates. And then this very first introduction, your project summary, that is your elevator pitch. This is the you gotta hook people right off the start. What your project will achieve, how it will be achieved, who's going to benefit, and ultimately why it's important. That's going to be the really important key points that you want to hit in this project summary. Now, the next part here is part C. This is all of the specific questions, and you can see the different weighting that's given to each of these areas. So the first question, we're looking to get some details around needs assessment, analysis, planned evaluation with measurable targets and outcomes. Now, we've seen this word before, measurable targets and outcomes. So as you're fleshing this part out, here's some questions that you can consider answering as part of your response. How was the need for this determined? Why is it needed in Beaumont? The more you can give us some context will help with that. In terms of what your need is addressing, how? Are you getting support from just within your organization? Has there been an opportunity to consult and reach out beyond your organization? And what kind of support comes from the broader community? In terms of the measurable targets and outcomes, this is part that can really help with that final reporting. Being really clear on what is it that you're trying to achieve. And if you're able to put numbers and specific timelines, ways of evaluating what kind of improvements are happening. It could be something like, we want to see our attendance grow from this number to this number, or we look to have participation grow in, from this many hours a week to this many hours a week. We want to offer admission to these types of populations that we haven't been able to offer admission to before, or get involved, things like that. And again, if this project goes ahead and you get the funding, what ultimately is going to be the result of it? Like, what are the concrete, tangible results that you'll see? And then thinking, how can you actually capture that information once it's done? The next question covers the cost benefit. And again, so this is really sort of evaluating every project that's coming to the table requesting funds is, it's sort of that balance of, this is, we're contributing to this. What's the outcome that's going to happen? Is there only a short-term benefit? Is it a longer-term benefit? How does that play out? And then on the flip side, what's the cost of not doing this right now? What are the negative outcomes that would happen if this project doesn't go ahead? What you're trying to show is tell a compelling story about, one, why this need exists in Beaumont, and how the project or initiative that your group is following up with is going to address it. And then really capturing, if this doesn't get handled right now, or we're not able to do this event, or we're not able to purchase this piece of equipment, this is how that would be a detriment to the community. So we want to that helps flesh out that whole story. Degree of financial need and self-help. So part of this is we're going to be looking at, this is where I referenced your project budget, but also your organization budget. So it sort of just, again, helps us say, sometimes groups can come in with what appears to be very strong financials. So in that regard, there almost needs to be a bit of an explanation as to, we're doing really well, we've got this much money in the bank, and that's this, this, and this. But the dollars that we're requesting for the grant would, we've got that money earmarked for this project. That helps us understand why the need for funding for support for this particular project or initiative, fits in with your overall mandate, and just paints a more completed picture. We're also looking to see, this is where, I mentioned with the project budget, you can have a line item in there that talks about other grants that your organization has applied for. It doesn't necessarily have to be confirmed dollars, but if you have a goal of getting X number of dollars in sponsorship, or you have an application that's going into a different governing body and you're hoping to receive X number of dollars from them, we can see that in there. And I think that demonstrates the organization's capacity to take this on in a serious manner, and show that there's some dedication and long forethought to the success of the project itself and the organization as well. Thorough project plan. Again, we've talked about this before. How does this fit in with your organization's mandate? Who's going to be impacted, and have those people been involved in the planning? We're also going to look at the viability of your plan. So we want to see what you've outlined. Is there enough time? Does it seem appropriate and reasonable that you'll be able to achieve these benchmarks within the timeline that you've set up? Have you and your organization considered the risks? If nothing else, COVID has really taught us that there's a lot of things outside of our control. So what kind of, risk planning or mitigation planning has your group taken to think, okay, well, if we get started on this project and we get halfway through, what could go wrong, and how can we plan for that in advance to make sure that we're actually able to complete our project? If it is a larger project or initiative, are there multiple phases or stages? Is there appropriate planning for each stage of the process? If you're working on a larger project, you could ask for funding to support one stage, and then say that, once we get this, we'll be doing more. And then could even come back later to request funds to support other components of the same project, but at a later stage. Number impacted and how. And again, it's talking about those measurable outcomes. Who is going to benefit? You know, can you identify specifically the demographics? How does it fit in with the broader community? Because, you know, there's obviously an awareness that if an organization is requesting funds for something, more likely than not, the most immediate and largest impact will be for the folks that are closely associated with that group. That said, some projects and initiatives might benefit the broader community to greater extents. And it's not necessarily that one is better than the other, but it just, again, helps paint that full picture. And I think one important point to consider here too is that the number of people impacted versus quality of impact, we're not necessarily looking for the biggest number of people to be positively impacted all the time. If your project or initiative can target a smaller specific demographic that's really, you know, underserved or has higher needs, that's important to help understand too. So it doesn't necessarily, every project and every initiative isn't being evaluated quite the same way, looking for exactly the same outcomes, but it's just part of that overall story. I keep repeating that, but that really is sort of what it's about. Financial stability. So again, in some ways, this ties to the project plan. Wanting to know, you know, if the grant funding is provided, is there enough, you know, good faith that your organization will be able to follow through with this? Have you demonstrated, you know, undertaking a project like this before? Do you have a fundraising strategy to go along with something if you're undertaking a big project? Have you seeked out other funds? Have you secured other funds, whether it's sponsorships, donations, grants? And again, this is that financial statements. They're going to be required as part of your supporting documentation. So what does that story tell us about you as an organization? Credible management. Again, this is just sort of part of that story of, you know, if you're perhaps a newer organization or, you know, maybe starting out with a smaller project, a smaller initiative to build up. And then if you're taking on a large initiative, event, opportunity, you know, that's part of that project plan and us going, oh, okay, you know, you as an organization have hosted nationals before. So you've walked through this, you've been it. There's a strong likelihood that you've got your ducks in a row and then this is highly successful, probable to be successful. So we're looking at, you know, and if you have a big turnover in the board or volunteers that are doing it, you know, it might be appropriate to speak to specific experience or skills of the folks that are involved with, you know, in lead roles within the project themselves. And then I guess at the end, this is just part of that overall review. Take a look at all of those answers, you know, question 1 through, I think, what was it, 7, you know, review everything and take a moment to step back and go, okay, how do all of our answers align back with the grant program priorities? Take a moment to look back at the, you know, the big picture of what the community grant program supports and go, okay, yep, we've told a compelling story, a complete story. We've given enough context to help people that we have to assume don't know us can understand how we fit and how, you know, what we're trying to achieve is important and is going to have a big impact. Remembering also too that as you start going through the project and you're on your feet and you're doing things, remember you're going to need to report on donated labor services. You'll need to keep your receipts so that you can show that expenses were in fact paid. And we also want to learn about your project results. So this is that part of, you know, keep track of what you've written and submitted as part of your grant application, because that's an easy way to say, okay, this is what we said the project was going to achieve. And then during the project, as the project is happening, you know, making some notes about, yeah, we are meeting this target, or this is the number of people that came out to our event, or this is the kind of feedback we're getting from community members or participants. And then that will help you, you know, complete a great report. And thinking about how you're going to report on some of that will also help you develop your project plan and your project budget. Project budget, again, we're looking to have your expenses and your revenues balance. As part of this, again, I'll just mention one more time that the total grant that you can request, you have to at least match that with the anticipated revenue that you're going to be able to bring in. So if your expenses are 10,000, the most you can request is 5, and you need to demonstrate within your project budget how you're going to meet those other $5,000. The project budget is also going to be evaluated kind of in hand with looking at your project plan. So is your budget itself realistic? Is it complete? Does it appropriate? Does it actually cover everything that you've talked about in parts B and C? So that's a good thing too, when you're going through your budget, you know, walk back through those questions and go say, okay, we talked about this, this, and this. Do we actually have that covered somewhere in our project budget? And I think one thing that's important to remember here is that if your project budget, your revenues or your expenditures don't fit neatly on the form that we have provided, you're welcome to submit an attachment in, you know, Excel, Word, Notepad, something that's easily, you know, broken down into what your revenues are, the amount of money that you anticipate coming in, what your expenses will be, or anticipated expenses, and the anticipated cost for all of that. And ultimately, we're looking to have the two balance out. Lastly, there's a few supporting documents that need to be submitted. So financial statements, your list of executive and board members, as well as your last filed annual general return. And then again, if you're applying and you are not a registered group, we're looking for official meeting minutes of the registered group with a carried motion indicating that they agree to sponsor the application. Financial summary and final report. So it's important to know that everything needs to be completed within 1 year. And you should be prepared to provide additional documentation if it's requested. So when you complete the form, you can do at a relatively high level the donated labor. So, you know, if you hosted an event and you had 20 people that volunteered for a total of, you know, 200 hours, and you're valuing that at $20 an hour, you can just put that in as high level, and then just make sure you've got that documentation behind the scenes so that if we go, oh, can we see your volunteer sign-in sheets, that you've got that and you can provide that if it's needed. Please do keep the actual receipts. You don't need to submit the originals when you do your report. Photocopies or scans as part of that. And then that just helps us ensure that you know, the expenses that you've listed are the ones that were actually paid out. And I think too, as part of the report, you know, how did you meet your goals? What went well, what didn't? And I think this is also a great, I mean, this is required for the grant, but it's also going to help you as an organization, you know, review the kind of planning that you did, how did that work, and help you out down the road when you want to plan something similar or even a different project altogether. You've just got some of those notes because, you know, a few months go by and you try to remember how everything went and it all becomes a blur, and you remember all the good stuff and you forget all the challenges and things that maybe didn't quite go as planned. So as the event is happening, as the project is going forward, keep track of all these little like, next time we're going to do it this way. Keep track of that. And then include what's appropriate as part of the final report. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. So I will stop sharing our screen and give everybody a chance to ask questions. Anything from anyone? Or Amy, perhaps if you wanted to give some words of, you know, what you've experienced being on the other side reviewing the applications.
Well, what I can say from being on the reviewing side is, again, like we said before, just make sure everything is really clear. You've got enough backup information, and especially in the budgets, just make sure everything matches up, because it can be the best application ever. And if your budget doesn't match, it raises a lot of questions and it reduces your chances of receiving your funding.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's, you know, it's challenging because, you know, as you're going through things, again, that's a part of reviewing the questions and going, okay, so we talked about doing this, 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 and this, and then the committee looks at the budget and go, oh, but they didn't include how they were going to pay for any of that. So yeah, that just helps us go, oh, okay, yeah, they've covered everything. They've got a plan about how to do it all. They've got a plan about how to pay for everything, things like that. So wonderful. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming today. And again, if there are any questions, please do reach out, send an email, give a phone call, and we will be very happy to help you work through the application process. All right. Very welcome.